You have some warm tea?
I will tell you that I'm having a little Irish coffee to help me through.
Yum.
I did it mainly for the whipped cream.
And I thought you did it for the warmth.
I think, well, and also the Jameson, but I think this might be my last Irish coffee of the season. I think Friday is supposed to be 72.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, well, if I don't react too much to the vaccine, I will go outside and get some fresh air then afterwards.
Make sure you don't take ibuprofen and things like that after your second shot.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't take those anyway because of my blood pressure.
Yeah. I mean, the CDC has been recommending that Tylenol's okay, but the other things are not good because your body is trying to build up its immunities and responds. And if you take ibuprofen and things like that, it suppresses your immune response.
Yeah, I know. I read that before, so I didn't take it at first either. But I only take something like that under dire circumstances.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, great. So I think we have maybe not quite critical mass. We had about, I think, 80 people registered. So we'll let people kind of file in as they do. But good evening, everybody. It's Jennifer. We've heard from you a million times now. Continuing on with our Fuel Powered Fair Maps campaign. I am hoping this is going to be like a quicker meeting to let you guys get back to your evening. But I am going to run through a couple of quick slides before I turn it over to Michaela from Representable, who's going to be doing the actual presentation tonight. But I just wanted to kind of give everybody a quick update on how the campaign's going, kind of where we're at with the campaign. So, of course, this is our Representable mapping software training. And for anyone who this is their first Fuel-Powered Fair Maps, sorry, I'm flying solo tonight. Laura took the evening off, so I'm letting people in while I'm doing this. So I apologize if I'm like looking off. To give everybody a quick refresher of what the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign is, this is a campaign launched by the National League in all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C., where we are working for fair, equitable maps at the local municipal level, the county level, the state level, and the congressional level. So the way that we're engaging with this campaign is through a number of different fixes. Here in New York State, we of course have our commission that we're working to fund right now, working very hard to fund right now, but we're also engaging in a number of outreach activities, including educating the public, building partnerships with stakeholder groups, engaging in community mapping in some cases, and advocating for fair maps. So what have we done so far? We've had a lot of webinars. We had our campaign kickoff in January, which is a very fun webinar that was very informative about the process in New York State of redistricting, our new process. We also held a panel discussion on mapping communities, what that's going to look like this time around, as well as a training on engaging communities of interest. We also have started to work with local leagues to identify redistricting delegates. So if you are not a redistricting delegate or you're not a local league leader and you're interested in that, definitely talk to your president about getting involved. We have a pretty nice list of members together right now. And then to corral all of our information, we've put together a web page, nyredistricting.org, where all of this information is available. All of the different panels we've had are there. The webcasts are archived there. All the different kinds of educational materials are there. And also this one will be there. So if you have to jump off early, or if you know someone wanted to be here and couldn't be here, they definitely can watch this back later. And then what's next? So next up is our people's hearing for New York State Redistricting 2021. April 29th is going to be a day of action for the entire US for people-powered fair maps. And the way that we're going to engage with this at the state level is to have what we're calling a people's hearing, which is basically going to be an event where we have members of the public, potentially league members, potentially other different stakeholder groups come and testify at a webinar that we're going to be holding. We're also going to collect public comments. So if people can't make it for whatever reason, We will collect public comments. We will put them into a nice document and we will have those available for the public. We'll also have them available for the commission. So that way, when they are ready to go, those comments will be nice and organized for them. And that is again on April 29th. 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. We'll have more information on this in the coming week. We'll have all kinds of outreach materials and press materials and different links to help promote and all of that. So that's our quick check-in. And now I am going to turn my screen over to Michaela Daniel. She's the strategy coordinator for Representable. I love this software. I've seen Michaela present this a couple of times already. I'm so impressed by it. I'm very excited to have her present it to you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go ahead and turn it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. So as she said, my name is Michaela Daniel, and I am the strategy coordinator for Representable. Representable is a free mapping tool for communities of interest and started about 3 years ago in a computer science class at Princeton University. Students realized that there was this fundamental problem with democracy, that communities weren't able to represent themselves during the redistricting process. So through Representable, anyone and everyone, regardless of their previous knowledge of gerrymandering and redistricting, can go in, learn about reapportionment and redistricting, give valuable testimony about their community of interest, map their community of interest, and then send this information to their legislator, their local League of Women Voters chapter, their friends and family, and etc. So a little bit more about me is that I am usually the point person for users and organizations if they have any questions about the tool, if they want to see a demo, if they have suggestions for future features, and etc. I'm also joined here today by Kyle Barnes, who is our executive director, and both of us are students at Princeton. I am a current senior. I graduate in 2 months, thank goodness. And Kyle is taking a gap year, and next year he'll be a senior as well. So with that, I'm going to take you through the website as an individual user, and then I'll show you how an organization like your local League of Women Voters chapter can use Representable. So here's the site. This is what it looks like when you type in www.representable.org. You're going to go ahead and click Get Started. And here is one of our landing pages. So like I said, we want Representable to be used to its fullest extent by someone who has no previous knowledge of what gerrymandering or a community of interest even is. So here we're telling users why they're on the website today. They're here to map their community and identify its shared interests so that public officials can take their concerns into account. We introduce the problem, it's gerrymandering. We introduce that concept as when politicians split up or pack together communities into districts that silence their voices. We then have this handy dandy video that walks users through what redistricting is, what gerrymandering is, what is a community of interest, and how Representable can help through communities of interest. So then users go to add their community. Today, I'm going to map my community in Georgia for y'all so you can see how someone can give very detailed information about their community of interest through our website. Nevertheless, every state has this state page. It explains what is redistricting, what it looks like in your state, and how Representable can help. Users can also learn about redistricting criteria in their state. We link to the state constitution so people can learn more if they want to. Here, I learned that Georgia, when our legislators are redrawing the districts, they must consider communities of interest. In my state, we don't have a specific definition for communities of interest, so we give the general definition. A community of interest is typically a population that shares cultural, historical, or economic interests. So now that users have learned all about redistricting and gerrymandering and communities of interest and why they're here today, they're ready to start mapping. First, filled in everywhere, we stop users and we have them make an account. Simply an email address and a password. This is to cut down on illegitimate submissions. I've already made my account, so I'm gonna just log in. So here we are at step 1 of the mapping process. Tell us about yourself. We explain that this information we're not going to sell or share. It's just to once again cut down on illegitimate submissions. If you are working with a population who feels uncomfortable sharing their information with you, specifically their address, when you create a community mapping drive, which I'll explain later, it's how you collect maps in aggregate. When you create that community mapping drive, you have the option to not collect addresses. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to go ahead and put in my information. And yes. So here's another one of our orienting pages. We're telling people that what they're about to do is give testimony about their community of interest before they map their community of interest. So we once again give the definition of what a community of interest is. And now we augment that with some examples. It can be your neighborhood or the area in which you live, the people who you want to choose representatives with, or a local group that is brought together by a common interest. So with that, people are ready to give some testimony. We don't just leave users flapping in the wind, not really sure what to say. There's so much that one can say about their community. We guide them by putting the testimony in 4 silos of thought: economic or environmental interests, community activities and services, cultural or historical interests, and community needs and concerns. This is in alignment with the definition of communities of interest. Under each of these silos, we have prompting questions, individual examples, and here you can see example testimony. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, copy and paste some answers I have already said about my community. So in terms of economic or environmental interests, where are residents employed? If there are environmental concerns, what are they? I say that my community, right outside Atlanta, struggles with unemployment, but most people do work in the city. However, there is a weak public transportation system. For example, here I get very specific. We have a park and ride on Panola Road, but no buses go around our neighborhoods to take us there. Additionally, a lot of people work at Stonecrest Mall. In terms of community activities and services, where do people gather and socialize? Where do people go to access services of several types? I say that the mall is where most people gather on weekends. And then in addition to this, church is a centerpiece of my community of interest. Georgia's in the Bible Belt. I get specific again. I say that Beulah and New Birth provide food, childcare, and healthcare. And then speaking of healthcare, I get specific again and say that most people go to DeKalb Medical Center in times of health crises. And most people my age, actually, I shouldn't say most, I haven't taken a poll, but many of us were born at DeKalb Medical. So it's just important to our community in several ways. So in terms of cultural or historical interests, we're asking users, what are the cultural bonds of your community, the shared history of your community as well. So I keep this kind of short. I say that my community is predominantly Black and has an aging population. Though in recent years, there has been an influx of new residences, as we used to be located in one city called Lithonia. A few years ago, there was a whole vote, and now we're split into 2 cities, Lithonia and Stonecrest. And with that, a lot of residents began to move on one side of town. Lastly, community needs and concerns. We're just giving users the space to say their piece, essentially. This can be anything from what should politicians and map drawers know about your community, and what are needs that aren't being met? Do you have any policy suggestions? Here you can see that the example testimony says, my farming community extends over 2 counties, and we hope you can put the community together in a single state Senate district. So if you, for example, live in an area that you know is gerrymandered, you can gather up 30 of your closest friends, draw some maps on Representable, and all say, hey, we live in this area that's heavily gerrymandered. We should be in a single state Senate district. And then you could round that testimony up through a community mapping drive on our site, and then send that to your legislator, post it online. Essentially, it's very strong testimony to show that a lot of people care about this single issue and know how to fix it, and lawmakers should listen. But for today, I talk about a policy issue. I say that education is really important to my community. I explained that a lot of the schools have been on the failing list for a while, but my community mobilized around this education issue a few years ago when the state was considering taking over or subverting the local school like district boards because they were underperforming. And that was the first time I saw people writing op-eds, going to town halls, doing civil disobedience, like, sit-ins. So seeing that this is an issue that's really important to my community, it's a value of my community, I think that we need to be in a single state senate district so one person can fight for this education issue. So with that, I hope everyone can see how this testimony page is a really good opportunity to get people talking about what matters to them, a really valuable opportunity to show lawmakers what's important to people, redistricting and otherwise. With that, people can name their community. I name it Michaela's home, and they're ready to start mapping. So on this mapping page, we're just explaining here in this box that you're mapping with census block groups, which are base units of the census. It's what lawmakers and map makers use when they're redrawing the lines. You can start by putting in a zip code, an address, or a landmark. So I'll go ahead and put in a zip code, and it knows it's Lithonia. So notice how these are census block groups. If you zoom in, you can see stores. Like notice here, this is the mall. Actually, we've landed right on top of. There's the Dillards and the Sears. Before I start mapping, if I forget what I said, like I don't know where to start, my testimony is right here that I can click on. It also lists community population. So as I click multiple census block groups, that number will increase. If you don't have a Michaela to walk you through the process, we have this video which you can access through clicking the question mark. It'll walk you through the mapping process, and we have FAQs. Lastly, in this top right corner, if you click the widget, you can increase the selection tool size so that you can select multiple census block groups at one time, like this. But I'm going to continue doing one at a time because that was a lot. And you can erase or undo, like I'll undo that one. See? So with that, what am I going to select to start making my community of interest? Well, what did I talk about in my testimony? I said the mall was important economically and socially. I said that DeKalb Medical was important to my community of interest. Many of us were born there. It's where we go in times of health crisis. I mentioned Panola Road, which I'll zoom in here, is right here. So I'll make my way over to Panola. And then I talked about education. So I want to make sure that the schools in my neighborhood are included in my community of interest. Don't really remember where the school is. I've been at college now for a few months. So I'll type in a name, Martin Luther King High School. So see how you can type in landmarks as well. You don't have to just know zip codes or addresses. It'll zoom right in. So I'll make sure that I include this in my community of interest. All right. So I'll go ahead and check the community population. 40,000 seems fine. Like I said, we used to be in one city, now we're in two. So I don't mind that we're stretching across several cities in my community of interest. Things to think about when you're asking yourself, who's not in my community of interest? What's not in my community of interest? I would say that this nature preserve is not in my community of interest because it's not something that matters to people in my community. I wouldn't say we gather there. I wouldn't say we access services here as well. I also don't want to get too close to the perimeter because I think people who live closer to the perimeter of the city have access to different services. For example, while we're dependent on parking rides and buses, people who live inside the perimeter have more immediate access to the train. So just some things to think about as you're making your community of interest. I'm pretty happy with what I've drawn here, so I'm going to go ahead and save my community. This is the last step. It's just letting you know that information is very important to us. We're not selling or sharing any information. So with that, you accept the privacy and terms of use. Last important point. Oh gosh, I have to do the CAPTCHA. I always get so nervous. One, I feel like challenged. Is that all? Oh yay, okay, success. But yeah, So submitted communities are final. Once you submit a community, you cannot edit that community, but you are free to make another community essentially that fits more along what other chains of thinking that you've had. There's not a limit on the amount of communities you can make. With that, I will go ahead and submit. This is the submission page. We're letting people know what they can do with their maps, very action oriented. They can export it as a PDF to their legislator, and they can click this to find who that is. In the PDF, it's a picture of your community of interest and the testimony that you gave. You can export your community of interest as a GeoJSON file, which is the industry standard for mapping, which means that you can upload this GeoJSON file into Maptitude, Dave's redistricting app, Esri or District R, and etc. Or you can resend your community of interest through email because you are actually already sent a confirmation email automatically when you make a community on our website, but you can resend this email, send it to your friends, family, coworkers. So with that, we're going to go ahead and see the data layers that you can, there you go, put in conversation with your community of interest. This is everything from counties, I should zoom out, to school districts, to state house districts. And you can see like how many times they go through my community of interest. We also have demographic information, which right now is just numbers, but we're working to incorporate ACS data as well. You can see your testimony on the left-hand side. Once again, you have the ability to export your map in these formats and a CSV file, which is primarily coordinates. So with that, that is how an individual will use the website, and I'll very quickly show you how an organization can use Representable. So if you were to go on the website right now, this would say partners. You would click on that button and very quickly make an organization with us, and you will see this dashboard. So with this, you have the opportunity to designate users as admins. So you could, potentially put all of the people in your neighborhood, your friends, your family, the other people in your League of Women Voters chapter as admins, because these are the people who have the ability to see the maps that have been sent to you through a community mapping drive. You create a community mapping drive and it looks like this. You give it a description, a title, and then you're given a unique link that you share with people who you would like to contribute to your drive. When people click this link, they will see a page like this, a condensed version of the individual user flow. What is Representable? The description of your community mapping drive, a little overview of redistricting in your state, and then they will draw a community through the same way I just walked you through. And you will see all of the maps in one place, like this. You can zoom in on individual maps and see the testimony that they gave. Hop over to another one and see the testimony that they gave. Zoom out and see them in conversation with data layers, such as state house districts. When you collect a lot of maps in a condensed area, they are opaque, so you can kind of see them on top of each other and make sense of what people's opinions are. But we always tell our organizations that Representable is not what you use to analyze the communities of interest. That's why you have the option to export them as a GeoJSON file, upload them into Maptitude, and then you can actually do this analysis and putting it with demographic data, seeing how they interact with each other. Or even some partners want to use the communities of interest as a layer when they're building perfect districts or the preferred district in Maptitude or Dave's redistricting app. So with that, I'll just point out a few other helpful features. It is translated into Spanish, and we are implementing Arabic as well. And by the end of the spring, we're hoping to have Mandarin Chinese as another language available to users, and perhaps even Hmong, it's looking like. If you would like to learn more about redistricting, we have a glossary, a resources page where you can find demo videos, which is essentially what I just did. So if you would ever like a refresher, those are available on our resources page. In addition to PowerPoints for community drives, if you want to, do a Zoom session with a lot of people and have them make their communities. We have a PowerPoint to help you through that. We have an organization guide, which has everything from helpful videos to tips on how to educate and engage your volunteers through Representable. And then lastly, if you have any questions, our FAQ page answers many of them. So we encourage you to go there first. And if you ever have a question that is not on the FAQ, we are available at team@representable.org. So with that, that is the site, and we would love to hear comments, suggestions, reactions, or questions.
You showed us your community of interest around Livonia. Can you also show us the actual district lines that exist there?
I could show you the state house districts, the congressional districts, and the state senate districts.
Thank you.
And something that's really exciting is that we met with the League of Women Voters New York City about a month ago, and they requested New York City Council districts as a data layer available to users who draw their communities in New York. And starting on Friday, that will be available to everybody. So that's exciting, yay. Just to say, Representable is a pretty malleable tool. Most of those data layers that you saw were actually suggestions from organizations. So definitely feel free to reach out and make a suggestion if you have a future request.
So if you're, I have a question. If you're doing a redistricting drive, I think was the term you used.
A community mapping
Wait.
drive, yes.
A map, right. Do each of the individuals who participate with typing out their testimony, can they also each draw their own maps?
Yes. So
Okay.
every individual would do the testimony and then draw their maps and then submit it.
And then you can collect those and you might have lots and lots and lots of maps that are kind of the same. And that's what you would describe that would be opaque and layered on top of each other. And is there a way that you can sort those and see some and not others, or do you just have all of them regardless of how many there are?
Yeah, currently it's just all of them in that one space. I'll show you the links again. So in your organization drive, you have the opportunity. You can do it by drive. So go in OneDrive and then get that link and see all the maps submitted to that drive. Or if you have multiple community mapping drives, you can see all of the maps that were sent to your organization. And then those communities are denoted by the mapping drive they were sent to.
So for instance, let's say we have neighborhood organizations in a city. And each neighborhood organization or each cultural organization has their own campaign for their portion of town and what they consider to be a community of interest and what the landmarks are and what the concerns are. We could have a sort of a separate silo for each of those that would contain maybe dozens of maps each. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
What about the census data? How does that get plugged into it?
Yeah, so two types of census data. The first one is about census geographies. So the 2020 census geographies were released a few weeks ago, and we're doing it on a state-by-state basis. Some states want to stay with the 2010 census geographies, i.e. the 2010 census block groups. Other states want to be on the 2020 census block groups. And Jennifer, which one did you guys prefer?
I don't know if we made a decision on that yet.
No problem. It's definitely a tricky decision, but essentially we're doing it on a state-by-state basis. So that's the census geographies. Whereas the census demographic data, since it won't be released into the fall, right now that population data that you saw earlier was American Community Service from the American Community. Yeah.
But don't you need that data in order to be able to make a somewhat of a determination for the lines?
For communities of interest, population is not a factor, neither is like demographic data, which is what's so wonderful about communities of interest. It's low barrier of entry. You don't need to know any of that information. For creating districts, you do need to know that information, and it's very important, and the criteria vary state by state.
It's also called the road of mission in Christian Church. So, what is the Lenten road?
Somebody had their mic on, had their mic muted when they were trying to ask a question.
I think that was just background noise. Michaela, someone in the chat asked about, is the population per district per state programmed into the software?
It's per census block group.
What does that mean?
So the blocks that I were selecting when I made my community of interest, those were census block groups, and they're one of the base units of the census. So when they go about the census every 10 years, they sometimes slightly change the census block groups as the notions of area, but they're pretty set from year to year.
So, and that is a unit where they count the people and they say there are X 100,000 people in that area.
Yes.
And we is it, Jennifer, do you mean it's we as a league or we as a state are deciding whether to use 2010 or 2020 census blocks?
So that would be for the whole state then, but I think we'll probably do like an internal survey of folks on this Zoom, and of course talk with New York City as well, because I know they're eager to use the tool too, and to promote using the tool as well.
Jennifer, am I correct that part of the concern is that this last census data is definitely not going to be complete and thorough? Is that part of the consideration?
I suppose.
Oh, that's not, okay, apparently not.
I
Because they cut it off. I'm sure they weren't done.
Yeah, and I mean the American Community Survey data is pretty recent, so that's, you know, pretty good data. But yeah, I have to talk with Laura about that.
And I have a question about the census blocks. I'm assuming those are very small areas, like a city, like a block.
It depends. So I'm not going to share my screen, I have to go back. But it depends on the area. So sometimes if I were to go into Atlanta, the city, the census block groups would be like very small because it's by the number of people in the census block group. Whereas I was out and a little bit in the suburbs, so they were a bit bigger, as you could see.
That
So I
makes sense.
imagine for a place like New York City, they would be quite small.
Okay.
And so, Miguel, I have a question about collecting the data. So we have the drive option. So obviously that seems like a good way for collating and collecting. If we forget to use the drive or someone's already created a map, what is the most efficient way for them to get that map to us?
Yeah. So right now they would need to remake a map through clicking the link that you send them for your community mapping drive, but we're actually implementing a feature to retroactively add your map. So in the future, users will have the option of, oops, I didn't click the link and now I made my community. In the future, they'll be able to send it to you, but for now, they'll just need to redraw the map through your link.
And are you able to share drive? So if I did, we have our own drive here and there's another organization in my community that's also doing maps, can we join our data to get, is there a way to kind of combine data, or is it kind of limited to the drive as established?
Right now, it's limited to the drive as established. What you could do is either make one of the people of the other organization an admin of your organization, and then they can export the data themselves and then put it together in another mapping software. Or you could export it yourself as a GeoJSON file and send it over to them.
Awesome, thank you.
Has there been any indication that the legislators are going to pay attention to these communities of interest that are submitted?
Yeah, we've talked to some of the commissioners on the Independent Redistricting Commission, and some of them are very receptive to the ideas of public input regarding communities of interest. Others are not. America, right? dueling opinions. But quite frankly, I do think a lot of people are interested in hearing what individuals have to say regarding their communities, because you can't get this information elsewhere. You can't get this testimony elsewhere, and you can't get these opinions elsewhere. So I would say a lot of independent redistricting commissions and several legislators are ready and willing to listen.
So how are you working with District R? Or how do you two sort of work? How do we use both District R and Representable as an organization?
Yeah. So you definitely want to choose your tool based on your audience. So Representable has a very clear user flow. In other words, it walks people step by step in the process of creating their community of interest, which is not available on District R. And then we also have that tiered testimony system of walking people hand in hand on the type of testimony that they give. That's the difference between us and District R, including the fact that we are translated into several languages. So it's a lot easier to use Representable. And if you're just trying to get Joe off the street to map their community of interest, I would recommend our tool.
So why would one use District R?
So
I went to their training session, like yours, and I gave up halfway through. It was neither engaging nor telling me anything, whereas you have made it perfectly clear what we can do.
I would say District R is definitely for a user who has a lot of knowledge of this, because with them you can also draw your district, which is a separate beast that you have to know a lot of different facts and figures about drawing your district. But Representable, we just do one thing, and we have made it a priority to be accessible. So I think it's that we're definitely catering to different populations.
Is the whole idea to get as many people as possible to join you in your community of interest and draw the same community of interest borders?
I suppose that's one way to go about it. I think that something I've learned from working here for like 6 months is that everyone has a different goal. Like some people are using Representable to essentially like map youth homelessness. Other people want to just focus on one area in their city that they know is going to be gerrymandered. And so they essentially want what you're saying, several people to say exactly the same thing. But then other organizations just want to gather all of the opinions and then send them to their redistricting commission. So they have a plethora of opinions, and the commissioners have a lot of different points of view when drawing the maps. So I would say that there are multiple ways you could go about it, and it depends on your point of view.
In New York State, you probably know that we have towns in addition to counties, cities, villages. And all. So I assume that that's taken into account for New York State. Not all states have that, I don't think.
What do you mean when taken into account?
Oh, well, good question. Well, because those are used for some political. Yeah, and they're actually the towns are used. For instance, our Congress representative has his districts include certain towns. It's confusing. That's part of the problem. That the towns add to the confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And I don't think all states have that. But I assume that information is accessible through your program.
When people zoom in,
asking.
they can see like city names and like the names of places like I was showing, and the street names. So people will be able to see it when they're mapping, like they will know where they are in terms of space, municipality.
And I think what Rhonda might be saying, I don't know if we have it or if it's like a suggestion, but we have, if the town lines could be in and the city lines could be in. And I know for many of us, our towns have elected districts too. So there are separate town districts for elections, and definitely in our counties, there are also county lines for election districts. So any of those that you're able to include, I think for us,
Thank you for
Selfishly, it's
explaining
very
that
helpful.
better than I could. Thank you.
Yeah, so
It just adds the confusion.
perhaps a data layer of
Yeah,
town
right,
lines.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
The interesting difference between the software that you explained today and District R is that District R begins on the premise of names of community organizations and sites. And it draws a map based on the connection of which people share those. So, but by specific landmarks. So it's a little more geographical. Does that make sense? But what is lacking is what your software does, which is to show you the overlay of how the districts by Senate, how it's represented. So it would be interesting to see how we can connect the two to see it visually, because I mean, I think both play a part in figuring out the numbers.
No, you make a very good point. I suppose. Yeah, it definitely just depends on what the end goal is of the communities of which you're getting from people and what you want to see at the end, because District R, you do have the possibility of collecting communities of interest from Representable, exporting them into District R, and then using them to, for example, make districts, if that makes sense. So that's one way that you could link the two tools together.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions or anything?
So I was going to say, does Michaela recommend that we start with Representable creating our communities of interest and then export them to District R, where you've got the more geographic areas?
Yes, that is one way you can do it. But you could also export it to Maptitude, Esri, Dave's redistricting app. It is compatible with several mapping softwares. District R is one option.
And of the options, Michaela, because I know it seems to work with most of them, is there one that you guys have found it works best with of those choices in terms of like, we're using this for communities of interest, but if you want to go to the next layer of drawing lines, like this is the program that we feel like our data works best with?
I wouldn't say we have a preference. I will say that Dave's redistricting app is also free, and so is District R. So that's what we point people to a lot. Maptitude tends to be, and Maptitude and Esri are more expensive and tend to be for people with a lot more mapping experience.
I just wanted to say, Michaela, I think you did a fantastic job explaining this. And as someone who hears the word software and kind of thinks, oh, it's going to be, this is a very friendly program, and you did a real good job. Thank you.
Thank you. We love to hear this feedback.
Michaela, I'm just wondering if you could give us in a couple of sentences a short paragraph that just sums up what we would want to explain to someone that that we were gathering. It's just something that's not as long as this, but just come and do this. This is what it's going to show you. My thought about it is we want people to come together, kind of think about the things that bring them together, and then we can start using this so that they will have some power over they can make testimony. They will have some power over the commission. They can say, this is what we want here. This is how our community lives. Now, if that's it, that's fine. Did I leave anything out?
Yeah, no. I usually start with, let's see, the problem is gerrymandering, I always say, is like the #1 threat to our democracy, because it's when lawmakers choose their voters opposed to when voters choose politicians. So one thing that you can do today to fight this problem is go map your community, because you know your community. You don't need to do any research about it. Map your community, give your testimony, and send it to your lawmaker or your League of Women Voters, so that they can't say they didn't know your opinion. Like, they can't steal your vote. That's usually the pitch that I go with.
That's good. I like that. I do the press releases and stuff, so I want to have that that power.
Definitely. And if you have free time, just emphasizing it takes 10 minutes or less. You can do it on your phone, tablet, and etc. It's translated into 2 languages. Very easy.
So you did yours as an individual.
I did.
Okay. But we could go to a group of people in our area who are all involved with land trusts and that conservation measures and so on. We could ask each of them to do it as a group, or should they ask each of their, say, boards of directors? And actually all of them kind of work together as well, the conservation groups. It seemed to me that's a major community of interest that's very important to our community. And we can approach them and saying, look at these things, go through the exercise and come up with some mapping.
Yeah. So my first inclination is to say make a community mapping drive just for the conservation groups and the persons whose main focus is environmental issues, so that you can have all of these opinions in one place, and you can have these individual opinions of people with similar values, but in one community mapping drive.
Okay. Got it. That makes it a lot.
So
it's falling into place.
I was interested to see all the different levels of districts you can play around with, such as the congressional, state senate, state here in New York, it's assembly, but then there's also the counties and going down. So for the purposes that we're dealing with the state, it's the congressional, the state senate, and the state assembly. And so when you look at communities of interest, a lot of times we're looking at smaller areas, which are very helpful for, let's say, counties and other levels. But like, I'm from the Rochester area, and one of the things that happens here, and I see when Rhonda mentioned about towns, there is a state statute that prohibits towns being carved up, but has no prohibition against cities being carved up. So we have a large town, the town of Greece, which is almost an entire, I get my numbers mixed up, but whether it's a state senate district. So they stay intact, but the other suburbs around us, which don't have the full numbers that they need, they want to take pieces of the city, and the city gets carved up, and the city gets gerrymandered. So we have actually been advised in a somewhat discouraging way that really something needs to be done about the state statute in order to address the issue of gerrymandering that happens to these cities the size of, let's say, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, Albany, who are more prone to these gerrymandering issues. But all of this is, you went through this, and I was like, I'm also not really a swift person with software, but I was feeling like, gee, I think I could get on here and play around with this. This looks very doable. And there's just many levels of application and how this can be used. So thank you.
Sounds awesome. I'm also just going to type in, for example, our email. So if you, as you go into this process of fighting gerrymandering wherever you live, have any questions, comments, concerns, you want me to walk through a specific part of the website with you, we are available at this email and always willing to help with any technical issues or difficulties you encounter.
Awesome. Any final burning questions?
Just had one question. When you say that you would have like a group link or a group drive, would you, does that mean that you just submit one community of interest that represents the group, or is there any way that, or are you able to communicate how many people are in that group? Or does it, each individual have to present one? Yeah.
So you could submit one community and in your testimony, make it clear, I'm submitting this map on behalf of 8 people who share the exact same opinion on me. Or you create your community mapping drive and you have those 8 people individually send their individual communities and their individual testimonies to the community mapping drive, and you see all 8 opinions in one place, just layered on top of each other.
Yeah, because to me, it just seems that if someone was analyzing the data, that they would, it would be more impactful to have, more people saying that this is our community of interest rather than one person. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great
Awesome.
job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that everyone on this Zoom go to representable.org and just try it for yourself. Just try mapping your community of interest. It's the best way to really see how it works, and also to see how easy it is when you actually do it yourself without fabulous Michaela helping walk us through it. So easy, makes it look so nice and easy, because it really is that nice and easy. And we will have potentially a Dave's redistricting app training as well. So you'll get to kind of see like how these play together and how you can take your community of interest and apply all of the rules and guidelines that we have for redistricting and see how that works as well. So this is the easy part. Thank goodness. That's the hard part, but this is the important first step. So Michaela, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I think we all got a ton out of it. It was recorded. We will put it on our website tomorrow afternoon so that anyone can rewatch it if they wish, or send it to somebody else to show them it. But I am going to let Michaela get back to her thesis. And I'm going to say good evening to everyone, and we will see you all at our next presentation.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you